All right, welcome back, everyone. Week 6 of the motivation mindset shift, flip your motivation switch course. Today, we're going to be wrapping up and tying it all together, all the things that we went over in weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, reviewing, going back around, and then tying it all into one. So the first thing that I want to just kind of make clear, that I hope is clear at this point, is that the entire course of flipping your motivation switch was a tongue-in-cheek kind of way to explain that there is no such thing. There is no motivation switch that you just get to flip on forever. The entire point of this course was to educate you around the things that stop us from being motivated and the things that stop us from doing the thing when we're lacking motivation. So since there is no way to just have an IV drip of motivation into our veins at all time, the next best thing to do is to plan ahead, as I'm always talking about. And that was the point of this course. We can't turn the motivation switch on all the time, but we can make it easier to turn on, and we can make it easier to find when we are walking around in the dark without motivation. So week 1, we started with stories and self-talk, right? And this is where we started the entire course way back then. And we remember, I said, everything starts within. Everything starts right up here, right? Because there can be nothing that we produce either physically, literally. We cannot create anything that we do not think of first, right? This Steve Jobs thought of the iPhone before he invented it. Anything that I say, I must think first. Everything starts within our brain. So when we understand that, we understand the power of our mind. And that relates directly into the stories that we tell ourselves and the self-talk that we have to and about ourselves. Remember that we choose the outcome that we want to see. If you remember week 1, I told you the story about going out to dinner and having a very nice time, but then having a less than ideal or a lackluster dessert. And then when recalling that dinner, being like, oh, well, dinner was kind of crappy, or dinner really sucked. But in reality, it wasn't the dinner that sucked. It was just the entire dinner had been good, but I remembered one part of it being bad, and that tainted my entire memory of the event. Right. So even though I had an all around enjoyable experience from the appetizer to the dinner to the drinks before the dessert, because of my brain and how I thought about it, it changed my perception of the reality of that dinner. And that's why the next point is that humans are crazy. The human brain is a nutso thing. And I hope that's one of the main takeaways you get from everything that we've done here so far. There's so much going on here. This is not an easy task. That's why I just said I cannot just flip the motivation switch. If it was that easy, it would be done already. And we have a lot of things fighting against us, such as the negativity bias. And the negativity bias is that we are more genetically predisposed to pay attention to negative things in our life. And again, this comes from an evolutionary imperative to survive, right? It's more important that we remember negative things because negative things can harm us than it is to always remember positive things. But because of that, we need to focus on positive things so much more and so much harder to outweigh the negative things, right? We'll always remember the sly remark that a coworker said or the thing that we heard someone whisper, but the nice thing that someone said to us, we kind of, it doesn't mean as much because we pay more attention to that negative. So we have to understand that and then create positive experiences in order to combat that, right? Since we pay more attention to the negative in our lives, we need to outweigh those with more positives, right? And that's why we have the things like using the affirmations, like the Post-it notes that we worked on from week 1, and all of those things to create positive experiences and positive momentum in our mind. We also have the recency bias. Recency bias is we pay more attention to things that happen to us more recently, right? So in the example of the dinner, I paid more attention and thought that dinner was a negative experience because it was the last thing that happened to me, right? The last thing that happened to me was having the dessert that was not ideal. If in that same scenario, I had a appetizer that was less than ideal, but then I had a really good dinner and a really good dessert, I would have probably looked back on that experience much more favorably. And the reason this is important is because the most recent thing that ever happens to us is our own self-talk. It is the story that is going on in our head. We are always the most recent person to talk to ourselves. Okay, so since things that happened more recently weigh more to us, we have to control that, right? So that means that if someone says, hey, you look very nice today, and then as soon as I walk away from them, I have the thought in my head of like, what was she talking about? I know I look like shit. That more recent thought is going to outweigh the positive thing that that person just told me. Now you double that by adding it with the negativity bias, and then we pay it more attention to negative things. Now we start to see why these small negative emotions, small negative events start to outweigh all of the positive. And then the last thing we have here in our humans are crazy section is loss aversion. And loss aversion is the human tendency to care more about not losing than we care about winning, right? And this is a safety thing. So the example that I gave in week 1 was that if I were to tell you, I'm going to flip this coin, and if it's heads, you lose $100. How much do you have to be able to win to make that bet fair for you? You would say something like $200. You wouldn't, most people would not risk $100, even though it's a 50-50 chance. Most people wouldn't say, well, if I'm going to lose $100, I only have to win $100. Most people would say, if I'm going to lose $100, I want to be able to win $150 or $200, because loss hurts more than gain does. Again, going back to the negativity. So we can understand this and set ourselves up in a way that we're having more success, and we're not always avoiding loss. We're moving towards gain, because once we are aware of this tendency towards loss aversion, we can be aware of it when it pops up in our day-to-day lives. So now when we talk about stories, we talk about the tape. Check the tape, right? So stories are the automatic thought processes that go on in our head because our brain wants to save time and energy. Again, everything comes back to biological imperative number 1, which is live longer, do not die. Our brain wants to save energy. In order to save energy, it doesn't want to have to think about everything that's going on at every given moment. So what it does all the time is it checks the tape, right? When I sit down, what do I normally do? I normally go right onto my phone and start scrolling. When I come home from work, what do I normally do? I normally go right to the fridge and crack a beer. When I do X, then this happens. These are things that are habitualized. Our brain checks the tape, click, what do I do? And then it goes based on that. So when rewriting our stories, what we need to do is rewrite that tape. That's where, again, we use those things like the affirmations, the Post-it notes, the touchdown affirmation when we touch our feet down on the floor, and all the different things to continually tell ourselves and feed a new tape into our brain. So if the old tape said, I never exercise, but I want to be someone who starts exercising, I start by rewriting that tape and saying aloud, reading on my affirmations, by programming my brain, I am a person who exercises. I like to exercise. I exercise more. And the more we do this, eventually when our brain goes to check the tape, because it's in energy saving mode and it has a decision to make, and it doesn't want to think through all the pluses and the minuses, it will just go to that tape that you now have control of, right? This is about taking control again and being proactive. Everything that we talk about is doing things before they become an issue. So we have to be proactive and programming our self-talk so that when we don't think about it and we're in that moment, it doesn't make the decision for us. And then the last thing in this stories and self-talk section is cognitive dissonance and mental gymnastics. And cognitive dissonance is just that we have the tendency as humans to try to justify the negative things that we do, right? So whenever we mess up, our brain, again, does not like for us to be wrong. So if we are wrong, or if we do make a mistake, it will find a way to make us feel as if we didn't make a mistake, to make us feel as if, or think as if, that we did the right thing, that we made the right decision, that it wasn't our fault, that it was X, Y, and Z. So we need to understand this because this writes a different story. If we're not being honest with ourselves about the reason that we're doing something, then we justify it and it becomes okay. So things like, I want to meditate, but I don't end up doing my meditation. Oh, but I had to walk the dog. Oh, but my phone was ringing. Oh, I didn't have time. Oh, I tried my best, but it didn't. And then we start to do all of these things, but all of these things are not the one thing that we wanted to do, which was to meditate. If we're honest with ourselves and say that, well, I just didn't do the meditation because I didn't do it, then we actually have to change that. But if we listen to the mental gymnastics and the cognitive dissonance and say like, oh, well, it wasn't my fault because X, Y, and Z happened, then we don't have to change that thing. And the story that we tell ourselves is not one that lines up with the actual person that we want to be. And that's when we create two different paths that we don't want to be on. We want to have one succinct thing. I want to tell the person I want to be has to match up with the stories that I tell myself. And we need to take control and, again, use tools like affirmations, like writing gratitudes, like all the things that we've been working on. The next thing we talked about, week 2, was goal setting. You don't reach a destination that you don't set out for. This is why goal setting is so important. There's a saying, the man on the top of the mountain did not land there by accident. You do not get into a car to try to go somewhere without putting the destination in your GPS. We do not get places by accident. If you want a specific outcome, you need to set that outcome from the beginning. Goal setting, though, is just step 1. So just saying, I have a goal of being rich, or I have a goal of being fit, or I have a goal of meditating, or whatever the thing is just step 1. To find true success, we need proper goal setting. Proper goal setting is an art, and it goes much deeper than just choosing a thing and saying that's a goal, right? And this is important. We spoke a lot about, during the course of this course, learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is that the feeling of once you fail at something too much, you stop wanting to try at it. You know, it's the old Greek story, or maybe, yes, Greek story of Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain just to get to the top, and it rolls back down, and he pushes it up and it rolls back down. Eventually, you're going to want to quit because you realize that you can't get there. So that's why proper goal setting is so important, because if we set goals that are unattainable, so an easy example is always weight loss. If I say I want to lose 100 pounds in 2 weeks, that's an impossible goal. And when I set a goal that's unattainable like that, I set out for the 2 weeks, I don't get my goal. Then I'm going to try again, and I don't get my goal. Then I'm going to try again, and I don't get my goal. All of a sudden, I have this learned helplessness where I go, well, it's impossible. There's no point in me trying to lose the weight because it can't happen. And we defeat ourselves, and we never try anymore. But when we have proper goal setting, we don't get into that cycle of, again, negativity and shame spiral down into learned helplessness. We also spoke about flow. And flow is on the opposite side of learned helplessness, because if you might think that, all right, well, if setting too big goals will set me up for failure and I'll get this learned helplessness, then I might as well just set small goals all the time. But what we learned from the concept of flow from the psychologist Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, or something like that, I don't know, is that humans actually want to and need to be challenged. We reach optimal peak performance, what they call a flow state, when we have a challenging issue that we're facing, right? So, you know, sports players talk about being in flow where towards the end of the game, where they're like, everything just went quiet. I don't even know what happened. I just blacked out, and then we won. Or a race car driver who just tunes everything out and they're really into it. Or even someone who's composing music or singing or something like that. People go into flow only when they're being challenged. You don't go into flow. That same basketball player who hit the game-winning shot in a blackout does not go into flow when he is taking free throws in practice, because he needs to be challenged. So we can't set goals that are too lofty, that are going to crush us and give us that Sisyphus complex, but we also can't set goals that are always too small, because we need goals to push us and stretch us, that will allow us to reach the optimal level of peak performance, because humans need to be challenged. And that's why proper goal setting contains SMART goals. SMART goals, remember, are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, right? Specific to the whatever your major goal is. Measurable, we want to have actual able to say, did I do this or did I not? How can I track this? It needs to be trackable, right? Because this goes back to learned helplessness. If I can't track my goal, how can I know that I'm getting to it? And if I can't know that I'm doing it, then I will again quit, right? So this happens with people with weight loss a lot, or people who are working out and lifting weights, right? They're lifting weights, but they're not tracking their results, and because they're not tracking results, they don't know that they're actually improving. So even though they may be actually improving, since they don't know it and they're not tracking it, they end up getting into learned helplessness because they're like, well, they think that they're not improving, even though they are. They don't know it because they're not measuring it, and again, then they end up quitting. Attainable means, is this a realistic goal? Is it possible? Is it possible in my current life situation and the current time constraints that I have with the resources that I have available? Relevant to my overall goal as a person. Maybe is this 3-month goal relevant to my 6-month goal or my 1-year goal or my bigger goal? And then timely. There has to be time constraints. There has to be a set time on a goal. So I'm going to get healthy is not a good goal. I am going to not drink any carbonated sugared beverages for the next 6 weeks is a very specific, measurable, and timely goal, right? Those are complete stark differences. Next, we have BHAGs and low LHF, which is low hanging fruit. BHAG is big, hairy, audacious goals. And those are your big, huge goals that are so big that they almost scare you. But the reason these are important, because like I said before, we need those big goals to push us and stretch us to get us to that flow state, right? We need those big goals. Those are like the 6-month, 1 year, maybe 3-year goals or something like that, that are really like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to make $10 million and donate half of it or something, like some crazy stuff, because that's what pushes us to really get out of our comfort zone. But as we said before, we cannot just have big goals because those aren't time constrained. They're too just out there. So that's why we have low hanging fruit goals, and low hanging fruit goals are the actual goals that are focused on the process and our day to day and week to week that keep us moving towards the big, hairy, audacious goal. So if my big, hairy goal is to make $10 million, my low hanging fruit goal might be to this week work on getting 10 new customers into my business. Then next week, work on doubling my income revenue for the week or something like that, whatever it is. All right. And then the last goal setting technique we have is the one thing. The one thing, again, comes from a book by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And it's just, what is the one thing that if I do this thing, all my other to-do lists, tasks, goals, whatever, either become easier or irrelevant, right? And this is the frame by which we should be framing all of our other goals. When I'm thinking about what do I need to do today? What do I need to do this week? What do I need to do this month? I'm looking at all of it through the frame of my one thing. Once I have my one thing, everything else is either working towards that goal or not. And if it's working towards that goal, then it's good. And if it's not, then I don't need to do it, because the one thing is where I want to go. What is the one thing that if I accomplish this goal makes everything else either irrelevant or easier? And if I can just look at everything through that filter, then I know that I'm moving in the right direction. And then next on this list, you see 9s and 10s only. So when I set goals, especially low hanging fruit goals, especially action oriented goals, when we're talking about the process, I want to ask myself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident am I that I can achieve this goal in the time frame I've allotted? And I only want 9s and 10s. So if I say I'm about a 7, that goal is too hard, because we want to build momentum and build wins. Because if we set too big of goals, we get learned helplessness, right? So we want 9s and 10s so that we know we're taking action and we're continually stacking wins. This goes back to the previous slide about stories. Stacking wins creates a story of, I am a winner. I am someone who accomplishes goals. I am someone who sets a goal and achieves it. But again, this is 9s and 10s for the low hanging fruit, small process oriented goals. For the big goals, it's okay if they're not a 10 out of 10, right? I can't say 10 out of 10 confidence that I'm going to make $10 million next year. I can still set that as a very good stretch goal to really push me. And then if we do that exercise and we say we want only 9s and 10s, and you say, I'm about a 7 that I can meditate every day this week. Okay, well then how do we change that? Because we want you at a 9 or a 10. So we either have to change the goal completely, meaning if you're saying that your goal is to meditate 7 days this week and you're only a 6 or a 7 out of confidence that you can do that, maybe we just change the goal. Maybe that's not the goal we need to be working on this week. Maybe you want to talk about something completely different. Or we shrink it. We say, okay, if 7 days of week of 7 days of meditating at 10 minutes for 10 minutes is too hard, how can we shrink it? What about 5 days a week meditating for 10 minutes, or 7 days a week meditating for 3 minutes? Let's make it smaller. And then inchworm would be, how do we make ourselves just a little bit more confident that we're able to do it? So if you say, I'm 7 out of 10 confident that I can meditate for 7 days this week for 10 minutes a day, I can say, well, what would it take for you to be an 8 or a 9 out of 10 confident? What would have to change for you to get there, to just inchworm it one digit over towards more confidence? And you might say, well, maybe if I didn't have so much other stuff to do in the morning, that I could, I felt more time. My schedule wasn't so packed in the morning when I woke up, because that's usually when I like to meditate. Okay, so then what does that mean? Well, maybe if I laid out my clothes the night before, so that I'm not worried trying to get dressed in the morning and picking out my clothes, that would free up another 5 minutes, and then I would be an 8 in confidence. Boom, perfect. We inchwormed it over. So we use one of those 3 tactics to make us and get us to that 9 and 10 out of confidence, to make sure that we are only working on goals in the short term that we are going to accomplish, so that we are creating wins, creating momentum, and that we are not getting into a place where we're setting goals that we are not achieving. Because that's the worst thing I can do for myself, is set a bunch of goals, not achieve them. Now I feel bad. Now I have self-talk going, oh, I never do this, I always fail, blah, blah, blah. And we're just kind of, we shame spiral out. Next thing is habits, right? This was week number 3. And remember that a habit is something we do repeatedly, subconsciously, without thinking about it, and with negligible effort. And that's what's so important, that we have to remember. A habit has to be so easy that it takes negligible effort, right? So going to the gym and doing a 2-hour workout might not ever become a habit, because that's not something that's ever going to be negligible effort. Tying your shoe is a habit because you don't even think about it. And it's something that we also have to do repeatedly and subconsciously. So just remember that when you're thinking about building habit, a lot of times people are like, I want to have a habit of eating healthy. But eating healthy has to do with grocery shopping. It has to do with cooking. It has to do with, meal prepping and having the right foods in your house, and dealing with family. There's a lot of things that go into it. So that's a big thing. It's we need to break things down into smaller chunks when we're actually talking about habits. And also remember that habit is not built in a set amount of days. It's one of the biggest misconceptions about habits. Oh, a habit is built in 21 days or 45 days or 66 days or something. And this is wrong. And it's important to understand this, because again, we get into this place of like, well, I did my habit for 21 days. Day 22, it should be a habit now. I don't have to think about it anymore. That's not how it works. Day 24, day 45, like it's not like there's a magic number that when you click it off, now it becomes a habit and it just becomes easier. That does not work like that. And we also have to understand that habits are not completely outside of our control, right? I just said they happen subconsciously, and that's once they become habitualized. But building habits is something that is actually directly within our control. And when we take ownership of it, that's how we take control of it. So the habit things that we need to remember are the habit loop, which is cue, response, reward. So cue, response, reward. And the example that I always use is super easy, is coffee. So the cue is I smell coffee, that my brain associates that with energy and likes having more energy. So the response is I drink the coffee. The reward is I get a burst of energy. The reward then solidifies that that happening in my brain. So it now my brain knows that every time I drink the coffee, I get more energy. And then the next time I smell the coffee, the cycle repeats itself. But again, it has to be something that's small and that the reward comes immediately. So this is why people always use like a cheat meal as a thing for exercise, right? They're like, oh, I exercise, so my reward is a Friday night meal out or something. But your brain does not associate those two with each other because they're too far removed from one another. When I drink the coffee, when I smell the coffee, I drink the coffee, I get the energy. Those things happen immediately, so to speak, more or less. When I work out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 4 p.m. at the gym, and then Friday I have a cheat meal that's a reward, my brain does not make that link and make that reward. So when we're thinking about habit loops, it has to be something that is happening immediately in result of what we're doing. And that's why, again, we come back to affirmations, because I can trick my brain by using affirmations and giving myself the reward in that exact moment. So if it's something that I'm trying to habitualize, I can have the cue, I can have the response, and the response that I'm trying to habitualize, and then I can reward myself with an affirmation. So let's say drinking more water is my goal that I'm trying to get better at. I'm trying to build a habit of drinking more water. I can lay a glass of water on my nightstand at night when I go to sleep so that it's there for me when I first wake up in the morning. So now my cue is when I wake up in the morning, there's a glass of water sitting on my nightstand. The response is I drink the water. I don't immediately get a reward for that. I don't feel that great when I drink a glass of water. I mean, I might feel a little bit proud, but it's, it's not the immediate reward that's going to habitualize this and solidify it into my brain. So what I can do is reward myself with an affirmation. You did great, Paul. You're awesome. Paul is killing it today. You started your day with a win. And I say that out loud because, believe it or not, no matter how silly it sounds, we like to hear nice things about ourselves. Even if we say it, it makes us feel good. Like when I say that, I start to smile. When Paul is awesome. Look at that. I literally smile. So I can cheat myself and trick my brain into habitualizing these things by giving myself a reward right at the moment of the action, right at the moment of the response. The next thing we're talking about is the Fogg behavior model. Fogg behavior model, again, created by BJ Fogg, who wrote the book Tiny Habits, which I highly recommend. And it says B equals M plus A plus P. Behavior equals a motivation plus an action plus a prompt. So in the example of the wanting to drink more water, behavior is drinking the water. My motivation is I want to drink more water. People say I need to be more hydrated. A is ability, motivation, ability prompt. So ability is, do I have the water there? So let's say I went to sleep that night without putting the water next to my nightstand. When I woke up, I might have the motivation, but I don't have the ability. The water isn't there. Next, let's try that again. So next night, I put the water on my nightstand when I go to sleep. Now I wake up in the morning, I have the motivation, I want to drink more water. I have the ability, the water is there. And what's the prompt? The prompt is, in the habit loop scenario, it's what's called the cue, but BJ Fogg goes a little bit deeper and wants a specific thing. So rather than having a prompt where I say when I wake up or first thing in the morning or something, which are kind of like, they're what's first thing in the morning? Is it when I open my eyes? Is it when I turn off my alarm? Is it, you pick a specific instance. So the prompt that I use in the morning is when my feet touch the ground when I get out of bed. So the second I turn my body, my feet touch the ground, that is my prompt to do the action of the behavior that I'm trying to solidify. It has to be a very, very specific thing that cannot be confused with anything else. All right. So behavior equals motivation. I need the motivation. I need to want to do it. I need to have the ability to do it. So whatever the thing is that I'm trying to do, it has to actually be possible. And I need a prompt, a specific thing that happens that tells my brain this is when I do. And then again, we can stack that with the habit loop there, and we can add a little reward afterwards of an affirmation or something to give us that little dopamine hit of, oh, that was nice, right? Next thing here, emotion equals action. The more we can tie emotion into these habits, the better chance we have of habitualizing them. Our brain remembers emotion. It doesn't remember scenarios. It remembers how we felt in those scenarios. This is why, again, going to the gym or working out is so hard if we don't feel a particular way about it. And that's why you'll see that the people who are truly successful, who just gym routines that they never stop, they always say like, yeah, I like it, or I enjoy it, or because they've started to they've started to link an emotion to the feeling of working out. So if we can link an emotion to whatever the habit that we're trying to build, that will push us in that direction much more. And again, come back to the affirmations and now that we know this, what can we do? We can use affirmations like, I did great today, and that makes me happy. Now I'm tying an emotion. I'm force feeding it a little bit. So again, we're cheating the system, but that's okay. So the wrong way to build habits is trying to drink through a fire hose, meaning we're trying to do too much too fast. We're trying to reinvent the wheel, right? So like I said in the beginning here, habits have to be small enough that they can be done subconsciously. They have to not even take thought. So saying I'm going to eat healthy this week by a habit is impossible, because eating healthy takes going grocery shopping, cooking, it takes prepping the vegetables, it takes stocking your fridge, it takes a million steps. So that's not something that's possible to be habitualized. The same way with reinventing the wheel, people think that they're going to go, well, I'm just going to be a healthy person. I'm just going to be someone who goes to sleep at 9 o'clock at night. Meanwhile, you're someone who goes to sleep at midnight after watching Netflix for 3 hours for the last 15 years. So it's like those things are not going to just change like this just out of wanting them. So we have to, again, understand this, because when we try to do too much too fast, we set ourselves up for that failure, that shame spiral, that negative, that learned helplessness. All right. And that's why the right way to build habits is with tiny habits. MED stands for minimum effective dose. I want to do the smallest thing that nudges me in that direction. So a tiny habit might not even be drink a glass of water. It might be take a sip of water. But taking a sip of water when my feet touch down from the bed in the morning, I take a sip of water. That's the tiniest thing. But that solidifies the habit. I can do that habitually. It's not about the habit is not go upstairs, grab a glass of water, fill it up, drink the whole thing, put it in the dishwasher. That's too much. It has to be tiny, tiny habit. The minimum thing that will count as drinking water. Okay. And then again, 9s and 10s only. I only want things that are 9s and 10s in confidence. Going back to the goal setting before, I want to be teaching myself that this is doable. I do not want to be setting goals that are so lofty for my habits that I'm setting myself up for failure. All right. And then we use habit stacking, where we put a habit that we're trying to build on top of a habit that's already there. Right. So my habit in the morning is getting out of bed. I do that already. I don't have to think about it. I get up out of bed every morning. So I stack the habit of drinking water on top of that. When I wanted to floss my teeth, I stacked that with what I was already doing, which was brushing my teeth. The moment I put my brush down in the jar, my other hand goes for the floss. And that became a habit for me. And we want our habits to be rewarding and also easy. That's the sweet spot. So something like, again, being super, something like being super easy. I mean, something like being super rewarding might be the gym, right? Or going to having a workout routine. That's a very rewarding thing to do. Or again, eating healthy, where I'm going full vegan and I'm prepping all my meals and I'm washing vegetables and I'm cleaning the fruit and all that stuff. Those are rewarding things, no doubt, but they're not easy. So they're rewarding and they're difficult and they're great goals, right? Because we go back to what we were just talking about before. We want to be in flow. We want to be pushed. We want to have things that are challenging and rewarding, but those are not things that are easily habitualized. We want things that are rewarding, but also easy to do. So something, again, like tying my shoe, that's very easy, but it's not rewarding. So I do it out of necessity, but it's not a habit that I'm going to build if I don't already have it. I just have to do it. But if you have something that's rewarding and easy, again, like flossing my teeth because I want to have better teeth as I grow up, that's where I can actually motivate myself to build the habit. And if it isn't rewarding, as long as it's easy, we can make it rewarding by using affirmations, by tricking our brain, right? So flossing is a very good example, because it's like, yes, it's rewarding technically, but it's rewarding in the long term, right? So I know that if I floss my teeth for the next 10 years, 15 years, that it will have an overall net positive effect on my dental hygiene. But that does not give me a reward in that moment. That does not give me, like, when I floss my tooth, I do not get anything in that moment. I get pain, I get blood. I don't like it. So in order to trick myself into having a reward, I give myself an affirmation as I floss my teeth. When I floss my teeth, I say my affirmation. My affirmation makes me smile. That becomes the reward. And that is how I habitualize it, right? So that's the main thing, is that it's a tiny thing that's easy. And once it's that, we can then give ourselves the reward by using things like affirmation. So we're tricking our brain into solidifying this as a habit. Eventually you won't need the affirmation anymore, because your brain will just use get the one signal, which is the flossing, and they'll remember how many times you, again, check the tape, check the story. Every time I floss, I say an affirmation that makes me smile. now eventually I'm just going to floss and I'm going to smile. I won't even need the affirmation because my brain is going to go, okay, every time I floss, I end up smiling. So it's going to link those two together. And that's when it becomes a habit. Good. So now coming into week 4. Yes, I believe we talked about scheduling and time management. And this is such a huge one because time is everything, right? We control it or it controls us. So many times people will just say, oh, the day just got out ahead of me. The time got away from me. This happened, right? If we are not being proactive with our time is being proactive with us. Time waits for no man is a very, very real thing. We need to be proactive with this, right? And that's why the secret of successful people is they plan for 2 things. They plan for the inevitable, the things they know they're going to happen, and they plan for the unforeseeable, the things that they don't know are going to happen. And if you plan for those 2 things, you've got all your bases covered, right? So we plan for the inevitable. That's the most important because we know that's going to happen. So when we don't plan for it, we're just doing ourselves a huge disservice. A very easy example is when training in a gym for many years, trained many Orthodox Jewish clients, and my Orthodox Jewish clients celebrate the Sabbath, Shabbat, right? So from Friday night into Saturday night is a holiday for the Jewish community. And it's often filled with lots of eating. Friday night dinner, Saturday night dinner are very festive, joyous occasions. They're amazing. We eat, we drink, we be merry. And I have religious clients who will come to me and they'll go, oh, I was doing so good. And then Shabbos came, Shabbat came, the Sabbath came. And I would always say to them, that is never going to stop. It is literally inevitable. So as long as you are not planning for that, there's no possible way for you to have success, right? It's the same thing when an accountant who I would work with would say something like, oh, it's just my busy season. Tax season comes every year. Teachers with their there's certain things in time that come all the time. And we know that they're coming, and yet we still get caught off guard by them somehow. So the first thing we do is we plan for the inevitable, and then we plan for the unforeseeable. The unforeseeable is, okay, I meal prepped for the week. What would happen that would throw me off my plan? What are the possibilities that could come in my day-to-day life that are going to make this harder? And then we plan for those things. So if and when they happen, we are better able to handle them. Now, obviously, you can't plan for everything, but the more we can do this, the deeper we can get, the better chance we have of not getting thrown off our game when one of these inevitabilities or unforeseeable things happen, right? Next thing we have to remember is that just in general, humans are horrible at estimating time. We just have to respect that, right? We think of time in the future as this far off abstract thing, like 5 years from now, 5 months from now, what the hell? They're the same to me, right? You can't imagine 5 years, 5 days, 5 decades. They're all this weird thing. And then in the past, it feels differently. It's like, oh, I can't believe it's 2021. I remember New Year's Eve on the year 2000 when Y2K was supposed to happen. It's like, it feels like a blink. And yet 5 weeks from now feels like forever, right? So we're very bad at estimating time forwards and backwards in different ways. So we also have what's called Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law is that the action that we're doing expands to fit the amount of time that we give it, right? So if I have 2 weeks to do a project, somehow I'll make it fit. It will take 2 weeks. But if you told me I had 7 days to do that same project, I would somehow get it done in 7 days. And if you said I had till the next year to do that same project, even though I could do that project in 7 days, somehow I would take me a year to do the project. We have to remember that, again, these are just human nature things. The way the human brain works, it is not good at estimating time. In Hofstadter's law says that the project will always take longer than we estimate. So when you say, I'm going to lose all that weight in 6 months, it's probably going to take 8. When you say, I'm going to build my business in 2 years, it's probably going to take 3. And we have to just know that we're bad at estimating time. So we have to give ourselves more space and build in cushions and buffers. Because if we don't, we get back to slide number 1 and 2, which were learned helplessness. Every time we set a goal with a poor time frame, we are setting ourselves up for failure. And when we set ourselves up for failure, we set ourselves up for shame spirals. Shame spirals mean we quit. And that's where we want to stay away from. Remember that James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, said that we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our planning. Planning is the antidote. It is the cure-all. Proactivity, getting out ahead of the problems, is the cure for everything. Doesn't matter what you want to achieve. If you simply plan ahead for it, that will alleviate 99% of the things that we struggle with, right? And that's why making a monthly, a weekly, and even a daily schedule will just make everything so much easier. Now, yes, it's annoying. It's tedious. No one wants to sit and write out all that stuff, but that's the price you pay for not having to suffer the pain of failure, right? This is the same, like it comes back to this whole thing. It's so simple. It's almost silly, but these are the things that make the difference between people who see success and people who don't, is the people who take the time to sit on a Sunday night and say, I'm going to schedule out my week. And then the people who take the time each morning to review that schedule on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, not the time when people say, I'll just figure it out. You take the time and you be proactive. And we use the one thing filter, right? I just spoke about this a few slides ago. The one thing, what is the one thing I need to do this week? The one thing. And we know, again, there's a million things to do, but what's the one thing I need to be focusing my time and my energy on? The one thing that if I did only this one thing, this is the only thing I accomplished for the whole week, I would feel like I had a good week. I would feel like I accomplished a lot. That's what I need to be focused on. And eating the frog is the same idea. As eating the frog is the first thing in the morning. How do I do the thing that I am most wanting to put off? Because again, those things are usually polar opposites. The thing I need to do most and the thing that I'm actually going to do are like the opposite, right? I know I need to do this one thing, but I'm going to go do my emails. I know I need to do this one thing. Oh, what? But I could also do groceries, right? So we need to flip that and make sure that the thing that I need to do is also the first thing that I do. We eat the frog, we just get it over with. And that way, again, if I do nothing else, if I did that first thing in the morning, I ate the frog and I had the one thing that I really, really needed to do and I got it done with, at least if the rest of the day doesn't go as planned, I at least got that thing done. And then the last thing that we come to is mastering your environment. Now, again, we started very much internal. We started with the stories, with the self-talk. We started building habits and building goals, and now time management. And now we end with mastering your environment, because your environment is the circumstances, objects, or conditions by which that you're surrounded. And that includes everything. So the music you listen to, the people you talk to, the advertisements you see, the food in your fridge, literally everything that you come in contact with consciously or subconsciously on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's extremely powerful. If you remember in this training, I talked about the environmental contagion, which was a study where they had a bunch of people sit in a room and do some random experiment, but they had a guy who was secretly a part of the study that no one knew, and he was an actor and he would act in different ways. So sometimes he would be very sluggish, and sometimes he would be very excited, and sometimes he would be happy, and sometimes he'd be funny, and sometimes he'd be a dick. And in all of these different experiments, the way that the person acted had a huge effect on the outcome of the experiment, and also the way the other participants acted as well. So when the guy was being a dick, the participants started being more like dicks. When the guy was being happy and funny, they all started joking with each other more and started to be more collaborative, right? So there was a direct connection between just one person in the environment and the effect on the entire rest of the experiment. And also a big key understanding that came from this experiment was that the people who were being affected, meaning not the actor, the people who were being funnier because he was being funny, or being angrier because he was being angry, did not make that connection. When they were interviewed in post-study interviews and they were told like, oh, did you realize that you were being a little bit more standoffish, or a little bit more like this, or a little bit more like that? They said, no, that was just me. That's how I am. They didn't contribute it to the environment. So this is important to point out, because we don't realize that this stuff is affecting us. One, it has a huge effect on us, and two, we don't realize. Right. And then there was also the anti-aging experiment, which is where they took a bunch of, 70, 80-year-old people from an old age home and put them in a controlled environment that was completely made to replicate their lives 20 years prior. And it literally changed them at like a health level. Like they they reversed in age because their environment had such an effect on them. So you can go look that up if you want to learn more about it, or go back to the previous week where I talked about that in more depth. And then the last law that we need to understand is Berardi's first law of nutrition. And again, Berardi's first law of nutrition is just that if I don't want to eat something, I won't keep it in the house. And if I do keep something in my house, then I assume that I'm going to eat it at some point. And this is a thing that he created, a tongue-in-cheek way to tell people about weight loss, about like, just don't buy the thing. If you don't want to eat cookies, don't buy cookies. And if I do buy cookies, don't pretend and trick yourself like by saying that, well, I'm going to have the cookies, but I'm just not going to eat them, because we understand that if it's in my environment, it's going in my mouth, right? And that can be extrapolated out beyond just nutrition and beyond just cookies and into everything, right? If I like, for me, a big thing is how much I scroll on social media. And it's easy enough for me to say, look, I'm just gonna limit my Instagram time. A much better thing to do would be delete Instagram, the app, off my phone. Because again, if it's in my environment, it's going to be there, it's going to tempt me. We have a limited amount of willpower. But we have to remember our spheres of influence. Our spheres of influence are what is in our control and what is outside of our control. So there's a lot of things that influence us that we cannot control. So something like traffic. If I'm driving and there's traffic, traffic is directly influencing me, but it's outside of my sphere of influence. I mean, it's influencing me, but I cannot influence it. No amount of me being angry can influence traffic for me. I cannot make the traffic go by kicking, screaming, honking, or doing anything else. So there's no point in me wasting my mental energy on something outside of my sphere of influence. Okay. My energy is finite, and there are many things in my environment that are going to affect me, but I cannot affect everything in my environment. So although I do want to control, I can only focus on what the things that are actually manipulatable by me, right? So again, I can change what time I leave for work. I can change the route I take. I can change other things, but I can't control the traffic. So I need to focus my energy on the things that I can control and that I can change. And this, again, just comes down to being proactive. I can take control of my environment by taking a step back, looking at it. This is why the exercise that we did at the end of week 5 was to audit your environment. If I can take a step back and look at all the things that are affecting me, I can start to see and understand where can I change, what things are in my sphere of influence and what things are outside of my sphere of influence. What is manipulating me without me realizing? Who is the environmental contagion in my life? But it only happens by being proactive. It only happens when you take the initiative and take the time to take a step back and really take a look at what's happening to you and what's affecting you in your life. So wrapping up, we come back to this loop. This is everything that we've talked about the entire time. And as I said at the beginning of this call, mindset shift, flip your motivation switch. Flip your motivation switch. There is no one switch that you can just turn on forever. The first thing I tried to get you to do is to be aware of the things, the mental roadblocks that are holding you back. Every class, we also talked about education. What are the tactics that you can do? Things like affirmation, things like scheduling, things like setting proper goals with our SMART goals and having low-hanging fruit goals and setting 9s and 10 goals, right? Being aware of the things that get here is the first step. We do not solve a problem that we do not know exists, right? That there is no possible way. So that is why awareness is the key. Now that you are aware, you can start to see these things in your day-to-day life. You can start to see the instances of self-talk. You can start to see the times where you're messing up your time management, where you're not being as proactive. You can start to see the environmental factors that are affecting you, that are changing your mood, that are changing your actions. All right. That's the first step, is just being aware that these things are happening. Then we educate ourselves. Okay, now that I see it, what can I do about it? There's a million things that I can do, but what are some of the ones that I think are best for me? We've gone through a lot of them over the course of these last few weeks, and there's a lot more out there. There's no end to what you could do, to the options available to you. And that's why the last step is taking action. And again, that's the thing that I can't do for you, right? My hope is that through everything that we've talked about, everything that I've taught you, everything that I've explained, you're much more in a place where you're aware and feel that you have the proper education to take action in some of these instances, right? Like take action to fix your self-talk, take action to influence your environment in a positive way, take action to set realistic goals that are actually going to push you forward but not hinder you. Take action to build healthy habits and build lasting behavior change into your life. But that is the last step. And it's a loop because this comes right back around. Once you take action, you'll become aware of something new. So this is a never ending cycle. This is growth. This is life. There is no end here. This is the end of this course, but this stuff never ends. Being better never ends. Growing never ends. So I hope that this was all helpful for you. Next steps for anyone in this course, if you want to continue learning, reach out to me. There's always more to do. There's always more that's going on in my ecosystem. There's always another course. There's always something else. But again, the loop never ends. Awareness, education, and action. I'm leaving you on the final step to take your own action. And I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed it. Thank you for being here with me, and have a great day.